Sometimes the only person willing to tell the truth is the one nobody respects enough to hear. The crystal wine glass shattered across the marble floor just 3 seconds before Daniel Seo lifted it to his lips. The sound cracked through the rooftop ballroom like a gunshot, slicing through the soft jazz music and polite laughter of New York's wealthiest guests. Every head turned at once. Conversations died mid-sentence. A violinist near the stage froze with her bow suspended in the air. Zuri Carter stood trembling beside table 12, her breathing uneven, shards of expensive crystal glittering around her black heels beneath the golden chandelier light. For one terrible second, nobody moved. Then the outrage came all at once. What the hell is wrong with her? A woman gasped near the champagne tower. That was imported wine, someone else snapped. Security. Zuri barely heard them. Her eyes stayed locked on Daniel Seo, on the untouched wine dripping slowly down the edge of the white linen tablecloth, on the tiny flicker of panic she had just seen cross Olivia Lawrence's perfectly polished face before it disappeared behind another elegant smile. Daniel remained seated at the center of the massive engagement table, impossibly calm while chaos erupted around him. His charcoal suit looked untouched by the tension spreading across the rooftop. The Manhattan skyline glowed behind him through walls of glass, cold blue lights stretching for miles beneath the rain threatening in the distance. Men feared Daniel Seo in every corner of the city, not because he shouted, not because he threatened people, but because he never needed to. He simply watched. And right now he was watching Zuri. The restaurant manager stormed forward first, grabbing her wrist hard enough to make her flinch. "Have you lost your mind?" he hissed under his breath while forcing a tight smile for the guests. "Do you realize who that is?" Zuri swallowed hard, her chest rising quickly beneath her black uniform. "Sir, he can't drink that." The room exploded again. Olivia let out a soft, disbelieving laugh from beside Daniel, slowly setting down her silver fork. Her diamond engagement ring caught the candlelight like ice. "This is absurd," she said smoothly. "Daniel, please tell me you're not entertaining this." Zuri felt dozens of eyes burning into her skin. Wealthy strangers stared at her like she was something dirty dragged in from the street. One man muttered, "Crazy waitress wants attention." Another whispered loud enough for her to hear, "Why is she even working an event like this?" Her face burned with humiliation, but she didn't back down. Because underneath the expensive perfume filling the rooftop, underneath the scent of roasted filet mignon and cigar smoke and rain drifting in from the Hudson River, she had smelled it. Bitter almond. Faint. Almost invisible. But unforgettable. The same smell that haunted her nightmares since she was 14 years old. The same smell lingering in the hospital hallway the night her father never came home. "Sir," Zuri whispered again, this time directly to Daniel. "Please don't drink it." Silence spread slowly across the ballroom after that. Heavy silence. Dangerous silence. Daniel Seo finally leaned back slightly in his chair, dark eyes unreadable beneath the soft amber lighting. He looked down at the broken wine glass, then at Olivia, then back at Zuri. The manager tightened his grip on her arm. "I'm removing her immediately, Mr. Seo." But Daniel spoke before anyone could move. His voice was low, calm, controlled. "Nobody leaves." The entire rooftop froze. Nobody at the rooftop ballroom understood what frightened them more in that moment, the accusation itself or the fact that Daniel Seo had not denied it. The manager's grip loosened slightly around Zuri's wrist as silence spread across the room like cold fog. Beyond the glass walls, rain finally began tapping softly against the Manhattan skyline, the city lights blurring beneath the storm clouds rolling over the Hudson River. Olivia recovered first. She let out a delicate laugh and leaned back in her velvet chair as though the entire scene bored her. "Daniel," she said gently, placing one manicured hand against his arm. "This girl clearly wants attention. She embarrassed herself enough already." Zuri noticed it immediately. Olivia never looked at the broken glass. She only watched Daniel. Carefully, nervously, like someone waiting to see whether a trap had failed. "Sir, please," the manager whispered urgently. "The guests are uncomfortable." Daniel ignored him completely. His dark eyes remained fixed on Zuri with a level of calm that made everyone else more anxious. "What is your name?" he asked quietly. Zuri swallowed hard. "Zuri Carter, sir." "How long have you worked here?" "For months." And tonight you decided to destroy a 70-year-old bottle of Bordeaux in front of 500 guests. A few people laughed nervously at that. Zuri felt heat crawling into her cheeks again. Humiliation wrapped around her throat like wire, but the smell from the spilled wine still lingered faintly in the air, impossible for her to ignore. I know how this sounds, she said carefully, but something was wrong with that drink. Olivia shook her head with practiced disbelief. This is insane. Then her expression softened into fake sympathy as she looked toward the surrounding guests. Honestly, this is sad. She is probably overwhelmed. Maybe someone should help her before this gets worse. A tall man near the back muttered, "Throw her out already." Another woman whispered loudly, "These people always create drama at luxury events." Zuri heard every word, every stare, every judgment. She suddenly became painfully aware of her black server uniform, her scuffed shoes hidden beneath the tablecloth shadows, the fact that she was standing in a room where people like her were expected to stay invisible. Daniel noticed it too, the fear in her posture, the trembling in her hands, the way she kept glancing toward the spilled wine instead of defending herself. Most people lied while looking for approval. Zuri looked terrified of the truth itself. Olivia leaned closer to Daniel, lowering her voice softly enough that only the nearest tables could hear. "You cannot seriously believe a waitress over me." Daniel finally looked at her, really looked at her. The rooftop candles reflected in his dark eyes without warmth. "I have not decided what I believe yet." For the first time that night, Olivia's smile weakened almost invisibly around the edges. It lasted less than a second, but Zuri saw it. Daniel saw it too. The manager cleared his throat nervously. "Should I call the police, sir?" "No." Daniel stood slowly from his chair, and the entire ballroom seemed to straighten with him. Even the musicians near the stage lowered their instruments. Power moved differently around men like Daniel Seo. Quiet, controlled, absolute. He walked toward the shattered glass without hurry, expensive Italian shoes crunching lightly against crystal fragments scattered across the marble floor. Then he crouched slightly beside the spilled wine and inhaled once. His expression did not change, but when he lifted his eyes toward Olivia again, something colder settled behind them. "Seal the rooftop exits," he said calmly. "Nobody leaves until I understand exactly what happened tonight." The atmosphere inside the rooftop ballroom changed the moment the exits locked. It was subtle at first. A bodyguard near the elevator touched his earpiece. Another moved quietly toward the glass staircase leading downstairs. The musicians stopped pretending to play. Wealthy guests who had spent the evening laughing over champagne and stock deals suddenly looked very aware of the storm outside and the armed security inside. Nobody expected Daniel Seo to react this way over a shattered wine glass. That was what frightened them. Zuri stood frozen beside the long marble table while waitstaff hurried to clean around her feet. Nobody offered to help her. Nobody asked if she was all right. They looked at her the same way people always had whenever trouble entered expensive rooms. Like she must have carried it in herself. Olivia rose gracefully from her chair, smoothing the front of her cream-colored designer dress with steady hands. "Too steady," Zuri noticed. "Daniel," she said softly, her tone almost amused now. "This has gone far enough." He did not answer immediately. He remained crouched near the spilled wine for another second before standing slowly to his full height. Rain rolled harder against the glass walls behind him, silver streaks flashing across the Manhattan skyline. "Has it?" he asked calmly. Olivia smiled again, but this time it looked rehearsed. "You cannot seriously think someone tried to poison you at your own engagement dinner." Several guests exchanged uncomfortable looks. One older businessman forced out a nervous laugh. "Exactly. This is ridiculous." But Daniel's attention drifted back toward Zuri. "You said something was wrong with the drink." Her throat tightened instantly. Every eye in the ballroom shifted toward her again. She hesitated. "I smelled something." A younger guest scoffed openly. "What is she, a chemist now?" A few scattered chuckles followed. Zuri lowered her eyes for a moment, humiliation crawling hot across her skin again. She could feel the judgment pressing down from every corner of the rooftop. The expensive watches, the silk dresses, the silent reminder that she did not belong among these people. But then she remembered the smell. Bitter almond hidden beneath expensive Bordeaux. Her father collapsing against the kitchen counter 14 years ago while paramedics rushed through their tiny apartment in Chicago. Her mother screaming his name. I know how it sounds, she whispered carefully. But I know that smell. Daniel studied her face in complete silence. No fear of being embarrassed. No concern about appearances. Only calculation. Olivia crossed her arms lightly. This girl is inventing stories because she panicked after dropping the glass. I did not drop it, Zuri said quietly. Olivia's eyes narrowed almost invisibly. Excuse me. Zuri lifted her gaze for the first time since security sealed the exits. Her voice still trembled, but not as badly now. I knocked it away on purpose. The ballroom went silent again. Somewhere near the back of the room, thunder rolled over the city. Daniel stepped closer. Why risk your job for a man you do not know? Zuri could not answer immediately. Because the truth sounded foolish. Because nobody in rooms like this ever believed girls like her. Because someone should have done it for my father. Something shifted behind Daniel's expression then. Tiny. Almost invisible. But real. Olivia noticed it too. Her posture stiffened for half a second before she forced another smile onto her face. Daniel, this is becoming emotional nonsense. But Daniel no longer looked at her. His attention remained entirely on Zuri. And for the first time that night, Olivia Laurent realized she was losing control of the room. Rainwater streamed down the towering glass walls of the rooftop ballroom, while the silence inside grew heavier by the second. Nobody returned to their conversations anymore. The champagne glasses sat untouched. Servers stood motionless near the edges of the room. Even the city below seemed quieter somehow beneath the storm clouds hanging over Manhattan. Daniel Co. remained facing Zuri, his expression unreadable, while Olivia stood several feet away trying to maintain the elegant composure that had made New York society adore her. But tiny cracks were beginning to show now. The kind only people trained to survive dangerous rooms would notice. A slight tension in her jaw, fingers tightening around the stem of her wine glass, eyes moving too quickly toward the sealed exits. Daniel noticed everything. That was why powerful men feared him more than louder men. He observed before he acted. Tell me exactly what you smelled, he said calmly. Zuri hesitated. Her heartbeat thundered so loudly she could barely hear the rain anymore. Bitter almond, she answered softly. Several guests frowned in confusion. Olivia immediately let out another soft laugh. This is unbelievable. But Daniel did not look away from Zuri. And why would that matter to you? The question pulled her backward 14 years in an instant. Suddenly, she was no longer standing beneath crystal chandeliers surrounded by billionaires. She was back inside a tiny two-bedroom apartment on the south side of Chicago during the middle of August heat. The ceiling fan barely worked. The kitchen smelled like fried onions and cheap coffee. Her father stood behind the counter laughing while teaching her how to identify ingredients by scent alone because he believed good bartenders listen with their noses before their mouths. Every smell tells a story, Z, he used to tell her with a grin. Most people just never slowed down enough to hear it. Then came the night everything changed. The flashing ambulance lights outside. Their apartment. Her mother crying into trembling hands. A police officer standing near the doorway refusing to answer questions. And underneath all of it, that smell. Sweet at first, then bitter. Almond. Zuri blinked hard, forcing herself back into the present before emotions swallowed her whole. My father worked in bars his whole life, she said quietly. One night, he drank something he should not have. The ballroom remained silent. Daniel listened without interrupting. After that, she continued carefully, I never forgot the smell. Olivia crossed her arms tighter now. Daniel, this is ridiculous. Anyone can invent a tragic story. But her voice no longer sounded smooth. It sounded rushed. Impatient. Daniel noticed that too. One of his security men approached quietly from the edge of the ballroom and leaned toward him. Sir, he murmured carefully. The kitchen manager confirmed Miss Carter never touched the wine before service. Olivia turned sharply. So now we are investigating waitstaff? Daniel ignored her completely. Where is the bottle now? Secured in the private lounge, sir. Daniel gave a small nod. Then his eyes drifted toward the shattered remains of the crystal glass still glittering across the marble floor beneath the chandelier light. And the fiancé? Olivia stiffened slightly at the wording. Not Olivia. Not my fiancé. The fiancé. Tiny changes mattered in rooms like this. Daniel, she said quietly, stepping closer toward him. You are letting paranoia embarrass us in front of everyone. He finally turned toward her then. Calm. Cold. Controlled. If someone attempted to poison me tonight, he said softly, then embarrassment is the least important problem in this room. Thunder rolled again outside the glass walls. Several guests shifted uncomfortably. Somewhere near the back, someone quietly set down a champagne flute with shaking hands. And standing beneath the gold rooftop lights, Zuri suddenly realized something terrifying. Daniel Seo was no longer trying to decide whether she was lying. He was trying to decide who else was. The storm outside deepened over Manhattan, while tension spread through the rooftop ballroom like poison. Nobody could see yet. Guests no longer pretended to enjoy the engagement party. Expensive smiles had vanished. Conversation stayed trapped in nervous whispers beneath the low golden lighting and soft jazz still playing from the abandoned stage speakers. Daniel Seo stood near the shattered crystal, one hand resting calmly inside the pocket of his charcoal suit, while security moved silently around the room awaiting orders. Nobody spoke unless he looked at them first. Olivia understood what that meant better than anyone there. Control was shifting away from her one quiet second at a time. A bodyguard approached Daniel again carrying the dark green Bordeaux bottle inside a white cloth napkin. The private lab technician confirmed residue inside the glass. "Sir," he said carefully. The bottle itself tested clean. Several guests inhaled sharply. Olivia's face lost color for the first time that night. Only slightly, but enough. Daniel noticed immediately. "Meaning?" he asked calmly. "Meaning whatever contaminated the drink was introduced after the wine was poured." Silence crashed down across the rooftop. Zuri felt her pulse stumble in her chest. Olivia stepped forward quickly. "This is insane." Her voice rose too fast now, too sharp for someone innocent. "You are trusting a frightened waitress over me because of some ridiculous test." Daniel still did not raise his voice. "No," he said quietly. "I am trusting patterns." Olivia blinked once. "What does that mean?" "It means," Daniel replied, "that Miss Carter has been terrified since this began." His eyes shifted toward Zuri for one brief moment. "You have been angry." The sentence landed harder than shouting would have. Olivia opened her mouth, then closed it again. Across the ballroom, guests exchanged uneasy looks while pretending not to stare. Zuri suddenly realized nobody was laughing anymore. The same people who mocked her 15 minutes earlier now watched Olivia instead. Daniel extended one hand toward the bottle. "Who poured my glass?" The restaurant manager swallowed nervously. "Olivia did during the toast, sir." Every eye in the room snapped toward her instantly. Olivia laughed again, but it sounded brittle now. "Of course I poured it. I am his fiancée." "You also insisted everyone keep drinking after the glass shattered," Daniel said softly. "You attempted to remove Miss Carter immediately. You asked twice for guests to leave. And you have not once asked whether I am all right." Olivia stared at him in disbelief, as if suddenly realizing the man beside her was no longer the man she thought she controlled. "Daniel, answer the question." His tone remained calm. That made it worse. Rain hammered harder against the glass walls now, turning the skyline into streaks of silver and blue. Olivia folded her arms tightly across herself. "I am upset because this entire situation is humiliating." "Humiliating for who?" Daniel asked. Another terrible silence followed. Then one of the security men near the entrance suddenly touched his earpiece and stiffened. "Sir," he said quietly, "we found something." Daniel's attention shifted instantly. "What?" The bodyguard hesitated before answering. A communications device hidden inside the women's restroom near the ballroom. Olivia's face went completely still. And in that exact moment, Daniel Seo finally stopped looking at her like a fiancé. For 3 long seconds after the bodyguard mentioned the hidden communications device, nobody inside the rooftop ballroom breathed normally. Rain crashed harder against the towering glass windows while distant thunder rolled above Manhattan like something alive moving through the clouds. Daniel Seo remained perfectly still at the center of the room, but the temperature around him seemed to drop anyway. People who had spent years around power understood moments like this. Silence from dangerous men usually meant calculations were happening faster than anyone else could follow. Olivia understood that too. "A communications device?" she repeated with forced disbelief. "That proves nothing." But her voice no longer carried the effortless confidence it had earlier that evening. Tiny fractures had spread through it now. Fear always changed people's rhythm. Daniel noticed rhythm more than words. Where exactly was it found? he asked without looking away from Olivia. Inside the decorative vent near the women's restroom entrance, sir, the bodyguard answered. Small transmitter. Active signal. Several guests quietly stepped farther away from Olivia without even realizing they were doing it. Wealthy people survived by instinct more than loyalty, and instincts inside the ballroom had begun shifting rapidly. Olivia forced out another laugh, but nobody joined her this time. Daniel, are you seriously suggesting I planted surveillance equipment at my own engagement party? Daniel finally took a slow step toward her. Calm, controlled, terrifyingly composed. No, he said softly. I am suggesting someone did. Zuri watched Olivia carefully from across the room. Earlier in the night, the woman had moved like polished glass. Elegant, precise, untouchable. Now there was tension hidden beneath every movement. Her fingers kept brushing against the side of her dress. Her breathing had become shallower. And for the first time all evening, she stopped making eye contact with Daniel for more than a second. One of Daniel's security men suddenly pressed his hand against his earpiece again. His expression darkened instantly. Sir, he said carefully, we may have another problem. Every head turned. Talk, Daniel replied. Thermal surveillance picked up movement across the street on the West Tower parking structure. The ballroom went completely still. What kind of movement? Daniel asked. Possible lookout position facing directly toward this rooftop. Several guests gasped softly. Someone near the back whispered, Oh my God. Olivia's face drained pale beneath the chandelier lights. She recovered quickly, but not quickly enough. Daniel saw it. Zuri saw it too. You think somebody out there was coordinating with the device? The manager asked nervously. The bodyguard nodded once. Looks possible. Daniel's gaze slowly returned to Olivia. Interesting timing. This is insane, she snapped suddenly, louder now. You are building fantasies out of nothing. Am I? Daniel asked quietly. Olivia stepped closer toward him, desperation beginning to crack through her polished exterior. Daniel, listen to yourself. This waitress makes one accusation, and suddenly your entire security team is acting paranoid. Miss Carter never accused you directly, Daniel replied. Olivia froze. The realization hit the room instantly. She had exposed herself without noticing. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Rain hammered against the windows so hard it sounded almost like static filling the silence. Olivia's eyes flickered briefly toward the locked exits again before returning to Daniel. That tiny movement was enough. Daniel turned slightly toward his security team. Escort Miss Laurent to the private lounge until this is resolved. Daniel. Her voice finally sounded afraid. Not offended. Afraid. You cannot be serious. He looked at her one final time, cold and unreadable beneath the golden rooftop lights. That depends, he said softly, on whether tonight was meant to be an engagement party or an execution. The private security lounge overlooking the lower Manhattan skyline felt colder than the ballroom above. Rain slid slowly across the floor-to-ceiling windows while muted thunder echoed through the high-rise building. Zuri sat alone near the edge of a black leather couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as she tried to steady her breathing. She still could not fully process what had happened upstairs. 2 hours earlier, she had been serving wine and avoiding eye contact with wealthy guests. Now armed security guarded every hallway outside the room, while one of the most feared men in New York investigated an assassination attempt that might have been stopped because she trusted a smell nobody else noticed. The door opened quietly behind her. Daniel Seo entered alone. No bodyguards. No assistants. Just him. His suit jacket was gone now, sleeves rolled neatly to his forearms, revealing dark ink beneath the white cuffs of his shirt. He looked less like a polished billionaire in moments like this, and more like the dangerous man rumors whispered about in expensive restaurants after midnight. Yet somehow he seemed more tired too. Daniel closed the door behind him and studied her silently for several seconds before speaking. You are shaking. Zuri lowered her eyes immediately. I am sorry, sir. For what? She hesitated. For causing all of this. A faint crease appeared between his brows, almost like confusion. You think you caused this? Everything was fine before I touched the glass. Daniel walked slowly toward the rain-covered windows overlooking the city. No, he said quietly. Everything was dangerous before you touched the glass. Silence settled again. Softer this time. Not threatening. Just heavy with exhaustion and adrenaline and things neither of them knew how to say. Zuri glanced toward him carefully. Under the dim lighting, Daniel looked different than he had in the ballroom. Less untouchable somehow. More human. She realized with sudden discomfort that he had nearly died tonight and still had not once shown panic. The security team found encrypted transmissions connected to the device, he said finally. Someone outside the building was coordinating movements inside the ballroom. Zuri swallowed hard. So it was real. Daniel looked at her then. You already knew it was real. She stared down at her hands again. I almost said nothing. The confession slipped out before she could stop it. Daniel remained quiet. When I smelled the wine, she continued softly, I froze. I kept thinking maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was imagining things. And then I looked around that room. Her voice tightened. Nobody in there would have believed me. Daniel said nothing for a moment. Rain tapped softly against the glass behind him. You still stepped forward. Zuri laughed weakly under her breath, though there was no humor in it. My father used to say courage usually feels a lot like fear. Something in Daniel's expression shifted slightly at that. What happened to him? The question hung carefully between them. Zuri looked out toward the blurred city lights below. He worked nights at a jazz bar in Chicago, she whispered. One night somebody handed him the wrong drink. Daniel's jaw tightened subtly, and nobody warned him. Zuri shook her head once. Nobody noticed until it was too late. Silence returned again after that, but it no longer felt cold. Daniel studied her differently now. Not like a waitress, not like a witness, like someone who understood what it meant to carry ghosts into every room you entered. Finally, he spoke again, quieter this time. You saved my life tonight, Zuri. She looked up quickly. I did not do it for money. I know. Daniel held her gaze for one long second while thunder rolled low above Manhattan. That is exactly why I trust you. When Daniel Co. returned to the rooftop ballroom, every conversation stopped before he even reached the center of the room. The storm outside had darkened the skyline into silver and black shadows, rain streaking endlessly down the massive glass walls while lightning flickered far above the Hudson River. Nobody touched the food anymore. Half-finished champagne sat abandoned across white linen tables. The engagement celebration had transformed into something colder now. A reckoning. Zuri followed several steps behind Daniel, unsure why he had asked her to return with him. The moment guests saw her walking beside him instead of being escorted out, the atmosphere shifted again. Earlier that evening, those same people had mocked her openly. Now they avoided looking directly at her at all. Fear changed social rules very quickly. Olivia stood near the far side of the ballroom, surrounded by two security guards. Her elegant composure had almost completely disappeared beneath the chandelier lights. Mascara slightly smudged near one eye. Arms folded tightly across herself. Lips pressed thin with restrained panic. Yet even now she tried to maintain dignity in front of the city's elite watching from every corner of the rooftop. Daniel, she said the moment he approached. You cannot seriously continue humiliating me like this. Daniel stopped several feet away from her. Calm as ever. Humiliation, he said quietly, usually arrives after betrayal. The sentence landed over the ballroom like ice water. Nobody moved. Olivia's expression hardened instantly. You have no proof. Daniel extended one hand slightly toward the head of security standing nearby. Without a word, the man handed him a small silver device sealed inside a transparent evidence bag. The hidden transmitter. This device was connected to encrypted communication signals traced to the parking structure across the street. Daniel said calmly, 30 minutes before dinner, your phone contacted the same frequency 3 separate times. Olivia's face lost the last traces of color. Around the ballroom, guests began exchanging stunned whispers. One woman quietly sat down as though her knees no longer trusted her balance. That proves nothing, Olivia whispered. It proves enough. Daniel's voice never rose. Somehow that made every word heavier. You selected the seating arrangement personally. You poured the wine yourself. You insisted security coverage be reduced around the west entrance because you claimed photographers were making guests uncomfortable. Olivia's breathing became uneven. Daniel, and when Miss Carter stopped me from drinking the wine, he continued softly, you tried harder to remove her than to protect me. Silence swallowed the rooftop again. Zuri stood near the back of the ballroom, frozen beneath dozens of eyes now turning toward her with something entirely different than contempt. Shame. Embarrassment. Regret. The same businessman who earlier called her crazy suddenly could not look in her direction at all. Daniel slowly turned toward the guests surrounding the ballroom. Wealthy investors, politicians, celebrities, men who built fortunes judging people by appearances. Interesting, he said quietly. The only honest person in this room tonight was the woman all of you dismissed first. Nobody answered him. Nobody dared to. Olivia's eyes filled with furious disbelief as security stepped closer beside her. You are choosing her over me? She demanded. Daniel looked at her for one final moment. Not angry, not emotional, simply finished. No, he said calmly. I am choosing the truth over performance. Then he stepped aside slightly, and security escorted Olivia toward the private elevator while the entire rooftop ballroom watched in complete silence. Zuri stood motionless near the rain-covered windows, overwhelmed by the impossible weight of everything unfolding around her. Then something happened nobody there expected. Daniel walked across the ballroom toward her, pulled out the empty chair beside his own seat at the head table, and looked directly at her beneath the golden chandelier light. Miss Carter, he said softly, please sit. The room went completely silent. 3 months later, the rain was softer over Manhattan. Not the violent storm that had swallowed the skyline the night everything changed, but a slow spring drizzle that painted silver streaks across the glowing streets below Lexington Avenue. Inside the blue ember, warm jazz music floated beneath amber lights and polished mahogany walls, while conversations blended softly with the sound of crystal glasses and piano keys. The lounge had become one of the city's most impossible reservations almost overnight. Politicians came for privacy. Celebrities came for atmosphere. Billionaires came because Daniel Co. owned it. But the people who returned every week came for the woman standing beneath the golden stage lights near the piano. Zuri Carter adjusted the microphone gently with steady hands, the soft shimmer of her midnight blue dress catching the warm glow above the stage. She no longer looked like the terrified waitress who once stood trembling beside shattered crystal in a rooftop ballroom. Confidence changed people quietly, not loudly like wealth, not sharply like power. Real confidence settled into someone slowly, like music filling an empty room. The audience applauded softly as she finished her final song of the evening, her voice lingering warmly through the lounge before fading into silence. Somewhere near the back, rain tapped against the tall windows overlooking Park Avenue, while candlelight reflected across dark marble floors. Beautiful as always, Miss Carter, an older customer said warmly as she stepped away from the stage. Zuri smiled politely. Thank you. The staff adored her now. Customers requested her by name. Even the waiters who once barely noticed her moved differently around her, with respect instead of dismissal. Because everyone inside the Blue Ember understood one thing very clearly. Daniel Co. trusted her. And in New York, that kind of trust changed everything. Zuri gathered sheet music from the piano slowly after the last guests drifted out into the rainy night. The lounge became quieter by the minute until only soft jazz remained, floating from hidden speakers overhead. She was reaching for her coat when she noticed the familiar reflection in the window behind her. Daniel stood near the entrance in a dark charcoal overcoat, rain still glistening faintly across his shoulders from outside. He had that same calm presence he always carried, the kind that silenced rooms without effort. But tonight there was something lighter in his expression than before. Peace, maybe, or gratitude that had finally settled somewhere permanent. You stayed for the entire set? Zuri asked softly. Daniel stepped farther inside the empty lounge. I own the place. I should probably hear the music occasionally. A small laugh escaped her before she could stop it. Daniel rarely joked. That made it matter more when he did. He loosened his gloves slowly while looking around the quiet lounge. The investors want to expand to Chicago next year, he said. A second location near the river. Zuri blinked in surprise. That is amazing. I want you to run it. She stared at him in disbelief. Daniel, I have never managed something like this. Neither had I, he replied calmly. The first time someone trusted me. Silence settled warmly between them while rain slid down the windows behind the stage lights. Zuri looked down for a moment, emotion tightening unexpectedly in her chest. Why? She asked quietly. Why do you trust me this much? Daniel studied her for several seconds before answering. Because the night everyone else protected appearances, he said softly. You protected a life. Zuri felt tears burn briefly behind her eyes. Not from sadness. From the strange weight of finally being seen clearly after years of being invisible. Daniel glanced toward the rain-covered Manhattan skyline beyond the glass. Most people in this city recognize power, he said quietly. Very few recognize character. Then his eyes returned to hers beneath the warm amber lights of the empty jazz lounge. You did not save me because you were fearless, Zuri. His voice softened slightly. You saved me because you chose humanity while everyone else chose comfort. Outside, the rain continued falling softly over New York while inside the blue ember, the world finally felt quiet again. And somewhere between the music, the silence, and the city lights reflecting against the windows, dignity had found its seat at the table at last.